Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Jack and I'm a student studying in London. And in this video, I'm going to go through how I went about getting 5 A stars for A level. It definitely wasn't easy, but I feel like there were a few things that I did that definitely made it a bit more manageable, and in this video I'm just going to go through those things. This video might be a bit long, so as usual timestamps will be in the description below so you can jump around and find exactly what you're looking for without wasting any time. And just for a quick reference, the A levels I did were biology, chemistry, maths and psychology and EPQ. Tip number 1 is to make sure you start revising properly from day 1. Now this is something that everyone will tell you throughout A levels, and that's the fact that it's so important that you start revising from the beginning, whether it's at the start of year 12 or when you're starting year 13. You always have to put in 100% from the start. When you start to slack off or you take it too easy and you begin falling back on content, then it's not like GCSE where you can eventually make up for it. At A level there's so much content that it becomes very difficult to catch up once you've fallen behind. Another reason I felt for me personally why starting early on and putting in effort from the beginning was so useful was it let me be experimental with my revision technique. Now for GCSEs I'd managed to obtain all grade 9s for every subject that I did, but even then I found that a lot of the revision methods I used in GCSE, although were quite effective, weren't working as well as I assumed they would for A level, and so that meant I had to do a bit of experimentation and kind of change up my approach here and there as I started doing more exams and started seeing how well I was doing. If after a test I didn't do as well as I wanted to, I could go back and kind of make changes here and there to my approach. And I feel like by starting off early it let me experiment a lot more, so that once the content really started getting heavy I was already kind of prepared and I had some sort of system in place that adapted to my A level subjects and made it a bit more manageable. Tip number 2 is to prioritize understanding content before everything else. When people start A levels they're usually really motivated, they're really pumped up and they're just ready to go straight into making all these colorful notes or making all these flashcards, but the reality is that if you don't understand content, especially at A level, then those notes and those flashcards won't really do much for you in terms of revision when you're looking back at them. A level is very different in that you have to take a concept that you've learned in lesson or from your textbook, and you kind of have to apply it to other scenarios that you might not have seen before, and this isn't possible unless you have a good understanding of the content properly. So make sure that when you're learning something new that you properly understand the ins and outs of it and that it makes sense to you. A good metric to kind of see whether or not you've understood content is to 1, try teach it to someone else. If you can teach it then it probably means you understand it, and 2, kind of think about how you'd explain it to a 5-year-old. Would you be able to do it, or would you find yourself struggling to kind of make it make sense? If that's the case then it probably means you haven't fully understood a concept properly. Once you understand content and once you start prioritizing understanding it, then you'll find that A levels becomes a lot more manageable, especially since a lot of chapters within the syllabus for the majority of subjects are interlinked. So if you get a good understanding of a chapter you might have studied at the start of the year, this might then help you in a chapter that you go through later on in the year when they begin to link up. Tip number 3 is to focus a lot more on active revision rather than passive revision. Now this video isn't going to go into too much detail about the differences between active and passive revision. I'm sure if you search YouTube there's so many videos out there that go in detail about it. Essentially active revision kind of prioritizes asking yourself questions, doing exam practice, and typically active revision, as the name suggests, is more active and kind of puts your brain under more strain when you're trying to recall information. Passive revision may have worked in the past for subjects like GCSE where the concepts were never too complicated, but at A level the reality is with the amount of content that you have, passive revision, things like taking notes, rereading, highlighting, really won't be too sustainable, especially when the content becomes very heavy, and you'll find that taking notes can be very time consuming and you sometimes get very little out of it. The quicker you accept that passive revision really isn't the way to go, the quicker you can start implementing active recall and all these sorts of more effective revision techniques in your A level, and you will hopefully notice a huge jump in your progress once you do that. Tip number 4 is that you have to be willing to make sacrifices if you want to do well. This isn't me saying that you shouldn't enjoy your A level years at all. But the reality is that if you do want to excel and you do want to kind of push yourself to achieve the most you can, there are times where you will have to make sacrifices. Now, this kind of applies to everything in life. If you want to do well at something, there will be times you have to make sacrifices, and your A levels are no different. This can take many forms. For example, it could mean saying no to your friends when they want to go out for a bit. It could mean having to skip certain family gatherings, or maybe be on your phone less so you can't message your friends as much. But these sacrifices ultimately are like an investment into your A levels, and you'll find that in the long run you definitely won't regret it, especially since you will most definitely get the opportunity to spend time with your friends. It's not like A levels will completely take that away from you, but just be smart about it, especially for example near exam season when you're going to be under a lot more stress, and it might just be better to say no to a few more things, and that way you can spend more time on your A levels. Now, tip 5 kind of follows on to the last tip. Yes, you should make sacrifices, but it's also very important to take time to de-stress and kind of relax a bit. Now, something I've mentioned in quite a few videos in the past, and something that I put a lot of attention on in the video where I talk about how I work about 30 hours a week during my A-level period, is that I always used to take Fridays off to kind of do nothing and just enjoy myself. This sounds very counterintuitive to a lot of people. You'd think that if you want to do well, then it makes sense to study as much as you can, but I can't express how much I think making that decision to take one day of the week just out of revision and just doing nothing academic, how much help that did for me. I feel like in the long run it made revision so much more sustainable, and I feel like giving myself at least that one day was definitely something that I don't think hindered me at all and did more good than harm for sure. Even during busy periods, there would be times where I'd sometimes do a bit of work just to make sure I wasn't falling behind, but I feel like I was really nice to myself in the sense that even during exam season I tried to kind of take the day off to do nothing. Friday for me was a perfect day because it meant that the next day I definitely had no school, so it was a lot easier for me to relax. Now, this is all dependent on your schedule and workload, of course, but I think everyone can sacrifice one day of the week to just do nothing, and it really won't make that big of a difference. Tip number 6 kind of builds on that point I made about active recall and active revision, and that's to do practice questions and exam style questions as much as you can for A level. This is especially the case for subjects like sciences, where there are definitely a lot of keywords that you need to know to get the mark. Unlike with GCSE, where you can give a sort of vague answer and still get a lot of the mark, at A level this just is not the case, and I find that a lot of the times I would lose very easy marks, not because I didn't understand the concept, but because I missed out one keyword. Another really good thing about exam questions and exam practice is that they obviously give you the best feel of what the actual exam will be like. Even something so simple as just understanding how questions are laid out and how they look on paper can really make the exam seem more familiar to you, and in the long run obviously will make you a lot less stressed when you see the exam paper in front of you and you have to answer the questions. It's also very important to understand the mark schemes. This is also something that a lot of my friends who did really well say, and that's that with A level, unlike GCSEs, the mark schemes are very important. It's very important to understand where the marks are allocated, and the moment you understand how the mark scheme works, you can start thinking almost like the examiner, and you can start pinpointing where you're getting the marks and understand what you must include in your answer during your actual exam or any mock exams you have. Tip number 7 is that you have to be consistent with how much work you're putting in. I know a lot of students, like I mentioned, get this burst of motivation when they're starting A level, and on the first day they'll do something like put 8 hours of work into their revision and then just be burnt out for the whole week. And trust me when I say that this was me at certain points, mainly during my GCSE. Obviously I wasn't working 8 hours, but I'd get this burst of motivation and then I'd do a lot of work on one day and just be tired for the rest of the week. Thankfully at A level I understood that consistency was so much more important than intensity, and I really want you guys to understand this as well. Putting about 2 hours of work, for example 5 days a week, is definitely going to do you a lot more good than, for example, working 10 hours one day and just being tired for the rest of the week and not being able to do any effective revision. When you focus on intensity, you run the risk of burning out and just not being able to spread out your revision throughout the week. And that obviously stops you from doing a lot of useful things such as spaced repetition, which can have huge impacts on how well you do in your actual A-level. So just remember that sort of mantra for when you're thinking about how much you should be studying for your A-levels. Intensity is never as important as consistency. Always remember that. A-levels is a marathon, not a sprint, so you don't have to put all your energy from the get-go. Space it out and don't burn yourself out. Tip number 8 is to make time for all your subjects appropriately. Now, a big mistake a lot of people make is that they think that there's only 3 subjects, so they definitely won't have to work as much. But the reality is that the amount of content in each of those subjects kind of makes up for the fact that you're only doing 3. It all builds up and it's definitely a lot of work. So you need to think about how you're allocating your time to each of your subjects. This was so key for me as someone who was balancing more than 3 A-levels. But even if you're only doing 3 A-levels, which by the way is still a lot of content, you still want to make sure you're allocating your time appropriately. For example, if you have a subject that you're very confident in, you're getting high marks in, and you're just overall doing really well on, there's no point of you spending an equal amount of time on that subject as you would another subject that you might be struggling on a bit more. For example, with me, I found biology and chemistry a lot harder than I did, for example, maths at the start. And so naturally, I would end up spending a lot more of my revision time on those subjects I was struggling on. And that let me get good grades all throughout. Whereas if I just put all my focus on maths, I might have gotten an A star in maths, but I would have definitely risked not doing as well as I'd want to in my other subjects that I'd struggle in a lot more. This can be hard to do because we tend to have a bias towards wanting to do the subjects we're good at because we tend to enjoy them more. We'll sometimes convince ourselves that we need to put more work into that subject simply because we enjoy it. But don't fall into that trap, because in the long run, you want to get a consistent good grade throughout all your subjects rather than just do really well on one and then lose track of the others. Tip number 9 is a bit of a difficult one, but it's something that if you can do will definitely save you a lot of work hours in the long run, and that's to pay as much attention as you can in class when your teacher's going through the content. Now, like I said, this isn't always easy. Typically you're in a class with your friends and there's so many opportunities to get distracted. I know me personally, I definitely wasn't focused 24/7 and it definitely got on some of my teachers' nerves. But as much as you can, you want to try and pay as much attention in class. I definitely found that when I put more attention to what my teacher was saying, that walking away from the lesson, I naturally felt more confident with the content, and as a result, it took a lot less revision for me to feel proficient with it. Listening in class can also save you a lot of trouble when it comes to understanding the content, like I was talking about at the start, because you remember most of the things your teacher has said, and that way you have less gaps to fill in your own time when you're revising at home. Another really important thing is in class, when your teacher is giving you feedback, take it very seriously. I found that especially in my essay-based subjects like psychology, this was definitely very important for me because my teacher understood how to write a good essay, of course, because she'd marked so many, and so hearing her feedback on it was definitely really important. I also had a friend who got an A star in geography, and he said a similar thing where he found that when he was doing long answer questions, listening to the teacher's feedback was really useful for him in understanding where he could optimize the marks and just get closer to the higher grade boundaries, and kind of just give him more confidence in ensuring that he could get as close to possible as he could to the highest marks he could get. Tip number 10 is to surround yourself with like-minded students who want to do well in their A-level. I'd say 100% that one thing that allowed me to do as well as I did was that I was surrounded by people who were equally as motivated, if not even more motivated, to work as hard as possible. I found myself around people who were constantly pushing me and never letting me feel like I was doing enough, which I thought was really good for me because it meant that I never slacked off. They usually hold themselves to such a high standard that doing a medium amount of work was never really enough, and I found that that definitely pushed me. Now, yes, I understand that there is a boundary between when that becomes healthy and when that becomes unhealthy. So it's totally up to you where you draw the line. But for me, I felt like it was a very healthy amount of accountability where they'd push me and I'd push them, and it was almost like a mutualistic relationship where everyone was helping everyone and everyone wanted to see you succeed. Whenever I'd have a lazy day or I didn't feel like working, I'd always kind of look at them as inspiration for me. And that would always push me to think, okay, if they're working as hard as they are, then I definitely can too. And that definitely made me think a lot of the times that if they're able to work as hard as they are, then I can get myself to work as hard as them as well if I really wanted to. Now, this isn't always easy, and I do consider myself very lucky to be surrounded by those type of people. But if you do have that type of student or students in your sixth form or college, then definitely surround yourself with them, because the people you surround yourself with can definitely influence how much work you put in. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to surround yourself with A-star students. The key thing is that you surround yourself with students who have good work ethics. It doesn't matter what grade they're achieving, whether you're working at a low grade or you're working at an A-star. That doesn't mean that you can't put in a lot of effort. There could be A-star students in your sixth form or college who kind of don't have to work as much, and so they won't really be pushing you too hard. But I was surrounded by people who, regardless of what grades they got in the exam, whether they did good, whether they did bad, they would never stop them from pushing themselves, and I felt that was really inspirational and played a big role in me being so willing to put in the work that I did. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. So if you found the video helpful or you feel like you gained something from it, then leave a like, subscribe, and let me know what you thought in the comments below. I've made quite a few videos on giving advice for A-levels, so if you fall into the demographic of an A-level student or even a GCSE student and you kind of want some study tips, then definitely check out some other videos on this channel. Thank you so much if you made it this far. That's been all from me, and goodbye.